didn't even ask me to agree. All right, so thank you, Janet. For those of you who don't know me in the room, my name is Karen Grabowski. I am also with the Office of Child and Family Services with DBHTS. I am the point of contact within that office who provides kind of support and TA and whatever else I can provide to our children's residential crisis stabilization units. And I just wanted to, again, welcome everybody. Thank everybody for being here. I know this is really challenging. We know a lot of your coworkers have to be at work right now, and it's the reason we're recording it is we do want everyone to be able to access this. This training idea came directly from the children's residential crisis stabilization units. I had met with representation from each unit last year and discussed what are some of the needs, what are some of the areas that just you felt like your staff needed more information on. And a common theme was we are serving many youth in the LGBTQ plus population community that are having a hard time, struggling with acceptance, struggling with family reactions, struggling with family dynamics, community reaction, all those things. And how do we have the information, knowledge to support these individuals, these youth who don't really have an option but to go home and to sometimes less than desirable conditions. And so how do you do this? How do you really support youth through this process and with such a temporary service, right? Like you guys are so short term, sometimes 3 days, sometimes up to 14 days, right? Like you don't have these youth for very long. So this is why this topic came about. It came directly from staff feedback that this would be a good training to have. So we have invited, DBHTS invited DeHaven here to speak to this topic. I think DeHaven's already identified again that this being more of a conversation, a really safe space to ask questions, to pose questions that maybe you've had in your head and been afraid to ask, like, "Ooh, is it okay to say this out loud?" This is the space and place to really put that out there and talk through how we serve youth in the LGBTQ population. So I will now hand it over to DeHaven. Please use the Q&A, raise your hand. We can ask you to come off mute if you aren't able to unmute yourself. So we really want this to just be an engaging conversation. So go ahead, DeHaven.
Yeah, morning, y'all. So starting off, like my name is DeHaven. I use they, them pronouns. I just moved to like Smithfield area. I find it fascinating, like where people live on virtual trainings. I don't know why. Clearly, I need to get a life. My background is I've worked with almost exclusively LGBTQs the majority of my career, and now I work at a national nonprofit where we're building a mental health curriculum for middle schoolers. I say that, but my background is education, right? I'm not a mental health clinician, so I always want to be very, very upfront with that. I've worked very closely with a number of mental health providers, but that's not my lens. My lens is more of that interpersonal violence prevention educator, let's play weird games and have awkward chats type vibe. But with that, if I don't know anything, I will be ridiculously transparent with that and try to answer any questions that I don't know within the day, like shooting y'all an email, whatever feels good. I also provided a number of different resources so that hopefully that can be in your back pocket for all of the youth that y'all serve. So like it was said, I'm ridiculously informal. I really like this to feel more of a conversation because I want y'all to get what you need. I find that time as I get older is a very precious thing, and I don't like wasting people's time. So if there is a question, a problem, something you've just been pondering, unmute, chat, whatever feels good, safer for you, please ask. And whatever, I find a lot of times with trainings like this, people are scared or hesitant to ask questions because they're like, I don't know the best language. Like, is this question in itself offensive? Like, what's going on? Just ask it in the language that you have, and I'll answer in a more like affirming way. But just we're all learning, we're all growing. That's the point of this today, right? So just use the language that you have. So starting off, right? Let me go back. What is a pronoun? Don't Google it. Jump on TikTok. There's probably, I feel like there's a TikTok for pronouns, right? That's probably a thing. Probably a thing. Going back to 6th grade English. Good Lord, I think I blocked it out of my psyche. But what might a pronoun be? Deanna?
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Pronouns are, what kind of describes that now? Like he, she. Is that what you're meaning? Like they, them,
So great.
his, her.
Yep. So thank you for being vulnerable, for being like, okay, let's go back in time, right? So a pronoun is a noun, right? And what it does is it replaces the subject. So if we have a simple sentence of DeHaven went to the store and they bought milk. So I remember my 6th grade English teacher, you would circle they, which is the pronoun, draw the little arrow to my name, DeHaven, and they is replacing my name, right? So a lot of times I'll be asked if a pronoun is an identity or like anything like that. And to me, a pronoun is simply a tool to help explain, like, this is who I am, this is how I see myself, right? But it's not an identity in and of itself. So one thing, I don't know if you're able, every platform is a little bit different, but if you can and you feel comfy, put in your pronouns like next to your name in parentheses, whatever pronouns you feel comfy using in this space. It can be he, him, they, them, she, her. They can be multiple sets of pronouns. And all that means is that you are comfortable with, I'm comfortable with she, her, and they, them. You can use them interchangeably. It's not a trick. I'm not trying to catch you, right? Or just I'm comfortable with this whole range of affirmation. Janet, I saw you on mute.
And just in case anyone is unfamiliar about how to rename themselves on Zoom, just take your mouse and kind of hover over your picture and right click, and you should see the option to rename at the very bottom of that drop down list. And you can go ahead and add your pronouns.
If you want to, no pressure. Consent, I'm all about consent, right? Like consent is big. But yeah, so pronouns, it's just a way to communicate and affirm someone. So I think right now, I think there's definitely a larger national conversation around pronouns, and it's just a noun, y'all. Like, that's all it is, just trying to affirm people. It's just a way to communicate. So the kind of vibe of today, because this goals and purposes, right? This is what adults do with trainings. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with what I call these kind of foundational concepts. Then we're going to slide into some risk factors. And I really want to leave plenty of time to just go through like action steps, problem solve, just explore any questions that y'all have. Because again, I think that is the most helpful versus me coming up with like, here are 10 things to do and not do, right? Like, yes, like those can be like useful, but you can also Google those and find endless lists of suggested action steps. So would really, really love to just problem solve with y'all. And starting off, whether you are present now or watching this recording later, I really ask you to know where you are at. Every time I make the unfortunate mistake of getting on social media or seeing the news, I can just feel my heart rate increase, like this heaviness just take over my whole body. Like there's just so much happening in the world, in our country right now. And I think it's really important that you just identify where you are at as a human. What is your mental capacity? So even today, if you're like, I'm done, I cannot, just take a break. right? Like that's also the beauty of having a virtual training is you can do whatever, you can just chill, curl up in a blanket with your pet, kiddo, family, have a cup of coffee, nice tea, whatever, but just take care of you. Like I give you permission to do that, and just show up the best that you can while also being open to learning and growing. Because again, the point of this is to show up for the youth that are in some serious crises, and how can we show up for them? I think there's a chat. Okay, cool. I'll do my best to like check in on the Q&A. If y'all have questions along the way, like please ask away. All right, so this is a magical spectrum of support, right? So we have hater, tolerant, accepting, and ally. So from my experience with dominantly working in schools, working nonprofits, greater communities, every space has pretty much all of these represented, right? And I think right now, definitely like hater is more vocalized in a way that I've never really experienced before. Like I think I saw the latest tally, about 450 anti-LGBTQ legislation bills have been introduced across the country. Like the rate and the volume is pretty, I feel like pretty unprecedented, at least in my lifetime, right? Like we've seen this before, but it's just kind of hit a new level. And so I think it's just really intensifying this dynamic of hater versus advocate, right? And I'm a firm believer in meeting people where they are at and trying to help folks who are kind of feeling like I'm in a more tolerant or accepting space of like, how do we move into a more active place, right? So in my mind, like, what is ally to y'all when you hear that word? What comes to mind? And feel free to like put it in the Q&A, unmute.
When I think of ally, I think of partnership, understanding, cohesiveness,
Yeah.
acceptance, even though I know accepting is before, but I think that's just part of it. Like I'm accepting it, I'm understanding it, I'm learning about it. I want to be intentional about it. So that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, I'm in a space with you, right? I'm here to listen, to learn. Maybe I do things like I put my pronouns to like show that I'm willing and able to have this conversation. Maybe I have like a lanyard with a rainbow flag on the lanyard, like these little cues, right? And all of these are great. They're brilliant steps into building that community and showing those cues that, hey, like I'm a person that you can turn to and have these conversations, right? And it also helps to balance any sort of hater or like tolerant, like I'm kind of like, okay, we can do this, but the second I see you do something visibly LGBTQ plus, like I'm kind of holding my breath and tensing and giving you a dirty look, right? Like kind of hate the sinner, love this, wait, flip that. Love the sinner, hate the sin type 5, right? So the goal of today, right, is how do we move past allyship, right? How do we move into a space that is more active and engaged and really trying to push back against those folks and voices who are more tolerant or hater? And like, in my mind, just like being a bully, right? Like just being actively mean and cruel. How do I step in a way that also protects myself, my sanity, my job, like all of these pieces. So that's kind of where I just wanted to frame things. Everyone feeling good? Karen, I saw you unmute and then mute.
Well, maybe I was thinking beyond allyship, because I was thinking of that piece of like, from my place of possible privilege, from more of the majority standpoint, how do I use that to advocate, promote, and speak up when maybe people in the minority don't feel safe to speak up? Like how do I use that? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And I think with that, right, like there's so much more power when folks who don't identify with the community speak up, right? It's like, if I, as a white person, say Black Lives Matter, It's like, wait, what? Like, why are you saying that? It's like, because I'm going to repeat Black Lives Matter. Like, I'm just like, just hear the words. There's a lot more weight to it versus if I, as a trans person, run and say, like, you need to protect trans people. It's like, of course, this is part of your agenda. But if a white, cisgender, straight man says, hey, you need to support trans and the greater LGBTQ plus community, it's like, oh, I guess I should, right? So absolutely, yes. And we will, hold on, we'll get there. You're like 20 slides ahead of me. So this is the magical acronym, right? So we have, if we were in person, I would make y'all shout it and it would be super awkward and great. So we have LGBTQ plus, right? So we have lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and then Q is queer and or questioning. The plus is like all of the hundreds of other identities that exist within this massive community. You can legit Google LGBTQ identities and there's just laundry lists of identities, right? I used to work at an LGBTQ organization. I used to run support groups, right? I do not know every identity that exists, and that is okay. The language is constantly evolving and changing. Just be a human and say you don't know. If a youth like vocalizes, I am this, it's like, awesome. Thanks for sharing, friend. No clue what that means. I'm gonna go Google it later. If there's anything you want to tell me, would love to hear it, right? Like, it's all good. We can just, I can still see that you're a human being and honor and respect you, right? And also, I think it's important to not get in like, and I've seen this with youth a lot, is that they'll kind of start infighting and being like, you're not truly gay, or you're not really bisexual or transgender because of this one thing in the definition. It's like, let's not do that. Like, all we're doing is bullying each other, and we have like bigger things happening, right? So let's pause and not have that. Like, maybe there's like group norms around that, right? We're gonna accept and let people use the language that they have to identify these really intimate pieces of themselves. So breaking this up a little bit, right? Lesbian, gay, bisexual are all sexuality. That's all sexual orientation, right? So, ooh, I think you're cute. I have a crush on you, would love to hold your hand, give you a little kiss on the cheek, whatever you do, right? Go on a date, look longingly into your eyes, the people that I'm attracted to. Queer is an interesting word where it's kind of a catch-all for the whole acronym. And it can also be a specific identity, to kind of touching on sexuality, gender. It's a very like fluid identity, right? So if you hear someone say like, oh, I'm part of the queer community, they just mean that it's like a shorthand. A lot of times I'll just say like, I'm queer. I don't want to go into all of the details of my identity. I'm just like, I'm saying I'm part of the community without like giving you the dissertation that is my life, right? Do not go up to someone and ask, hey, are you queer, right? Like, it does not register correctly, right? It's, we don't want to do that. We don't know people like that. And it's also important to be mindful of generations. If I'm in a space with older folks, I'm not going to go up and be like, hello, like, welcome, like my fellow queers. Like, I'm not going to do that because that's used as hate speech and still is for a lot of folks, right? But like younger generations, if I'm hanging out with middle schoolers and I'm like, hey, what's up? Like, let's chat about the queer community. They're like, cool, you know, because there's no charge, right? It's just a completely different relationship to the language. So just some things to keep in mind. And then the T, right, that's focused on gender identity. So just wanted to parse these out a little bit for folks. So these are all of the foundational concepts that we're going to work our way through. So each triangle is its own thing, its own identity, right? But they're all in conversation with one another. But what we're taught is that each piece is kind of lumped together. And so I think that's where a lot of the fear and the confusion exists, is that we're assuming that sex assigned at birth equals gender expression, equals sexual orientation. Like, we're just kind of putting all of these together into this really messy, chaotic ball, when in fact, they're all separate and they need to be seen as separate things because they, again, relate but they exist independently. So what we're going to do is just kind of walk through each one of these little triangles of magic. I like this color, like that orange. It feels like very like fall-y, right? I feel like we need to be drinking like a chai tea latte. Anyway, so sex assigned at birth, right? So we are all born, as far as I know. I don't know another way to enter this world other than like we pop out of a body and we exist in a body. If you have like a wormhole into another universe, let me know. I watch a lot of Marvel. So when we are born, right, we have these two categories of male and female, right? So these two categories are based off of our physical bodies, which is made up of hormones, chromosomes, gonads, sexual organs, genitalia, all of these different things. All of these pieces come together to create us and our little shells, right? We like to think that all human bodies, all billions of us, can fit neatly into these two little categories. The reality is that human bodies are on this massive spectrum. Human bodies are weird. The more I learn about it, I'm like, what is happening? Like, I watch a lot of Grey's Anatomy. It's just like bodies are strange little nuggets. The reality is that a lot of bodies do not fit cleanly and neatly into these two categories of female and male. And for that very large community, that word is intersex. So that's just anyone whose body is just sort of more ambiguous, just not neatly fitting. So an example is I could have the external genitalia of someone who's female, but inside I have testes. They're not doing anything, they're just chilling, but that technically puts my body in a more like ambiguous space, right? Or we could flip it where I have a penis and then I have ovaries, or like one ovary, and it's just nothing's happening, right? It's just sort of existing in my body. There's a wide range of the intersex community. Sometimes we need medical intervention, sometimes we don't, right? A lot of times medical intervention is done because I think we as humans, we like things in neat little boxes, and we get very uncomfortable very quickly when it's just sort of like, I don't know where to put you, right? So a lot of work has been done to try to pause unnecessary medical intervention and just let folks be, right? So the rough estimate with intersex folks, I've heard a wide variety of different numbers, but one rule of thumb always stays true, is that there are as many folks with red hair as there are folks who are intersex. That does not mean a person with red hair is intersex. Stats don't work that way. And do not go up to someone with red hair and ask if they are intersex. It is literally none of your business, right? But the point is very, very much more common than we think. So with sex assigned at birth, from the moment we are born, we are put on this path of categorizing, of you are either in one of these two boxes, and from there that kind of sets you up for your whole life journey. Is everything making sense so far? We feeling good? We're plugging along? Cool. All right, so the expectation is that my sex assigned at birth and my gender identity are going to line up, right? But again, sex assigned at birth is my physical shell. Gender identity is my internal understanding of me. It's how I feel about myself, how I see myself, how I feel in my heart, mind, and soul, right? In my head, I am a 16-year-old skater boy. I am 31. I cannot skateboard, and I'm a poser through and through, right? It's like, bro, you just got to move on with your life. So I buy a lot of Vans and I don't know, listen to like punk music, whatever. But that's how I like, that's my most like authentic self, right? So gender identity, we have dominantly these two categories of man and woman, girl, boy. The assumption is that my sex assigned at birth and my gender identity are going to line up. For a lot of folks, myself included, that is not the truth, right? Gender is like a fascinating thing where it is socially constructed. What that means is it's going to change across time and across space. Every community around the globe has a different understanding of what gender is, how it exists. If you look at a lot of indigenous communities, for example, there's a wide variety of examples of man, woman, and like a third gender, of someone who's sort of a combination of man and woman, or experiencing a completely different journey that they as a community have the language for, but us in the United States, 2023, do not, right? So this is something that has always existed, and it's, again, has a very, very wide range of how it shows up, and it's just going to depend on the community, the time, and where you're at in the globe. So with gender identity, again, we have the assumption that those little arrows are going to line up. So my sex assigned at birth and my gender identity are aligning. If this is your truth, congratulations, you are cisgender. So cisgender is not hate speech, it's not a slur, it's not an insult, it's just to literally account for your lived experience. I learned from a very smart Latin teacher that cis is Latin for like on the same side of. It's like, huh, the more you know, right? So for a number of folks who do not experience that alignment, the massive umbrella term is transgender, right? So that is someone who was assigned a gender or a sex at birth, and then they do not align with that gender identity as they get older, right? So for me, myself, and I was assigned female at birth. As I've gotten older, identify as non-binary, and we'll get into that in a minute. So if you have a youth who comes up to you and says like, hey, my name is Mary Sue, I don't know where this name is coming from, what youth is named Mary Sue, my pronouns are she, her, do, right? Like, and you find out that she's a young trans girl. So if we go backwards, that means Mary Sue was assigned male at birth, probably, and identifies as a young girl, a young woman. Make sense? So we would just say Mary Sue is a girl, right? We don't need to even say she is a trans girl unless it's relevant for the conversation or how to help Mary Sue. Also, some things around that. I don't need to know Mary Sue's birth name or dead name, right? Unless it's her legal name, but even then, maybe I can just have it on a form in a like secure location, and everyone on the floor in the community knows Mary Sue is Mary Sue, and we're not secretly saying, like sipping coffee, being like, snap, Mary Sue, his real name is this. It's like, nope, Mary Sue is her real name, and we're going to affirm Mary Sue, right? Everything else is just noise that we're going to work through. Everything making sense? Cool. I only see 3 heads, so we're just going to keep on. All right, so some examples of the trans community. So we have MJ Rodriguez, Laverne Cox, both use she, her pronouns, and then Elliot Page uses he, him pronouns. MJ Rodriguez she's an actress and advocate. She was in Pose. That's the biggest thing I know her from. I'm sure she's been in other things. If you are bored this weekend, I think it's going to get cold again, so I'm prepared to just hunker down and hide all weekend. Highly recommend binge watching Pose. It's a beautiful, beautiful show that weaves together all of the actors' lived experiences for the most part. It really is like their journey, at least in the 3rd season, with some really important history. And it's a community of Black and brown trans women who take care of each other in like 80s, 90s New York. Super intense show. Can be a little triggering, but just an incredible show to learn history and so much about the queer trans community. Laverne Cox, another actress, advocate. I feel like Laverne at this point has done so much. Started out Orange is the New Black. I feel like she's been in so many things, I don't even know, right? But both of these women are trans women who present in very, I feel like traditionally feminine ways, right? I feel like both of them, for the most part, are like in heels and dresses most of the time. I have a theory that Laverne Cox doesn't in tennis shoes. Like if she works out, she's like in stilettos. That's my truth. So with both of these folks, right? Like I center their trans identities for representation. But if I was like hanging out and I was like, snap, my BFF Laverne is coming, I wouldn't introduce her as a trans woman, right? Like she's just a human who's coming to hang out and like vibe. You get what I mean? So just like be mindful of, why am I centering this person's identity? Is it important information, or am I just sharing this because I think I have to, when in fact I really don't, right? So the last person, Elliot Page, another actor. I need to like change up and find different folks, right? To me, actors in one space. But Elliot, I feel like, is the most recent person who just came out as trans, I guess a couple of years ago now. Elliot's first big movie was Juno, if y'all ever saw that. It came out when I was in high school. Absolutely loved Juno. It was like this level of sarcasm. I feel so seen. It just set the whole vibe. So when Juno came out, this was way before Elliot was publicly out as trans. And so Elliot's dead name or birth name is Ellen, right? So recently, Elliot just finished up the Umbrella Academy. So one thing I'll hear folks say is that Ellen or Elliot is in Umbrella Academy. But again, we want to honor the name that Elliot is using. So I'm just going to say Elliot was in Umbrella Academy and in Juno. I'm not going to switch depending on where Elliot was at on his journey, right? Elliot started his career in Juno and now is in Umbrella Academy. Does that make sense? Okay, I think brains, like, we're really big on association, but it's really important to try to interrupt that, especially if you've known this person throughout their whole life. My mom really struggles with this still. Like, she'll call me by my birth name when she's talking about me as a kid, and then she'll switch when she'll be like DeHaven as an adult. Like, she's working on it. We're all on our journey, but she'll just kind of pause, and I can see her brain working really hard, and then she'll correct and continue her story. It's like, get it, mom, keep on keeping on. Yeah, Ashley, and I saw your comment about Dwayne's daughter. Oh, what is her name? I just saw a story.
Zaya.
Mm-hmm. She was just in like a fashion week.
Yes.
I just saw that and I was like, that's beautiful, man. But yeah, Dwayne Wade, Gabrielle Unions, their kiddo just came out as trans recently, and they've just been brilliant advocates and incredible speakers. Like, just a really beautiful story, that whole family. But I saw that and I was like, get it, girl, like, you're in fashion week, like, you're fancy. Like, I don't even know what is fashion week. Like, I'm running around in a hoodie. Last example, we have Janelle Monáe, who came out as non-binary, kind of gender expansive, uses they, them pronouns. And so I found this quote from Janelle in an article, and it says, "I don't see myself as a woman solely. I feel all my energy. I feel like God is so much bigger than the he or the she, and if I am from God, I'm everything." And I love this quote because not very often in US, like Western culture, do you hear about gender as this kind of energy or this sort of vibe that you can play and explore and literally like just dress up with, right? Like, and just use it as a tool to express yourself and be like, hey, today I feel this, tomorrow I feel this, or like throughout the day, like I'm feeling more masculine, more feminine, more neutral, like whatever language you have, but like you just don't hear that a lot. So I just thought this quote was really profound to just kind of touch on that and sort of break apart this really entrenched teaching that gender equals body, when in fact gender is so expansive, so dependent on your community, your time, that it is this ever-changing thing. Yeah. I was trying to check for questions, and now Janelle has disappeared. All right, so with non-binary, right? Non-binary, I should have a visual for this. So if we have the trans umbrella, non-binary is a identity underneath the trans umbrella, right? So this is anyone whose identity does not fit into the binary, meaning man or woman. It's someone who maybe feels like they're sort of floating in between, maybe a combination of man and woman, or just someone who wants the freedom to explore and create their own gender experience, right? So for me, myself, and I love the identity of non-binary because I feel like it allows me just that, like this freedom to play and recreate this like masculinity 2.0, right? Where I feel like to me, he, him, I'm like, whoa, that's like, I always want to like buff up my shoulders and be like, hello, right? Like, it just feels very like boxy and stiff. And I'm like, I don't know like how to do that, right? But with he, him, I feel like I can do these like traditionally like masculine things or like play with that vibe, but then I can also run to my wife and be like, I want to giggle about Grey's Anatomy and eat ice cream and curl up and like talk about emotions, right? Like I can just bounce and play and do all of these things in a way that just feels authentic. And to me, they, them just gives me this expansive language, right? So that's kind of my experience. And if at this point in this training or this conversation, you're like, I don't know what any of this means. What in God's green earth are you talking about? I'm still stuck on what a pronoun is. That's great. You don't have to fully understand someone's identity to respect them as a human. You just don't, right? There, like, I'm sure if I got the chance to get to know each and every one of you, there's so many pieces of your identity and your story that I could not fully understand or comprehend, but I can still see you as a human and treat you with a decent amount of decency and respect and honor and try to figure out like, hey, what do you need to feel seen and affirmed in your identity, right? Like, and we all have so many pieces that make us who we are. And I think one of the best things about life is figuring out like, hey, what is your story? How can I honor you? How can I see you? And I think right now that is seriously lacking in our culture, where the second you're different, you're treated as an other and not as a human. And so much of this legislation that we're seeing is doing exactly that. It's dehumanizing LGBTQ youth, which is having a serious impact on the mental health of LGBTQ youth and the greater community, regardless of age. All right, so we have our physical body, we have our internal understanding of who we are, our gender expression, and then we have to dress our body because we cannot run around in our birthday suit. That would be scandalous. So gender expression is our hair, our makeup, clothes, all of these different things. Again, gender expression changes across communities, across culture, across time. For example, during George Washington's time, these dudes were walking around in wigs and high heels. Today, if I am a cisgender dude and I'm walking around in wigs and high heel, I would probably get like a double take, right? In fact, Tennessee just passed a bill where it is illegal to do drag performances or to dress in a way that is like, the language in the bill is very vague. So it's kind of this like anyone who is not fitting into their perceived gender, right? And so actually in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and earlier, it was illegal to wear clothes. Like it was 3 or more items of clothing that did not align with your perceived gender was illegal. Right? So depending on certain times, like what, throughout the early 1900s into the 20s, 30s, it was scandalous for anyone who's a woman to wear pants. Right? The expectation was you're going to wear a dress and a skirt, and that was like really radical that you were wearing pants. So you could actually be, depending on what you're wearing, if you're wearing pants and a blazer and a button down, that's 3 items, you could be arrested for basically wearing a suit as a woman, right, at certain periods of time. And so we're kind of seeing this repeat of this policing of what people can wear, how they can show up, right? So with gender expression, this does not equal your gender identity. So I can wear feminine blouse, a dress, whatever, and still identify as a guy, right? It does not equal that. So I feel like a lot of times our brains are wired to make shortcuts. And so we look at something like gender expression and think, huzzah, you are wearing this, you have long hair, I'm going to code you as feminine, right? And then I'm going to say, yes, ma'am, all of that. So instead, try to pause that so that you're not automatically going on that autopilot and potentially misgendering something. You can still show respect through all of these different ways, like body language, eye contact, just like a welcoming vibe, without falling to that gendered language. And I say that as someone who grew up in Mississippi, and I straight up got detention if I did not say yes, ma'am, no, sir, right? Once you know someone's like gender, how they feel about themselves, great. Affirm them all day long, like, dude, yes, ma'am, no, sir, rock it out. It's just try to have that pause so we're not in that autopilot. All right, so with So have y'all ever heard of like the term euphoria? Gender euphoria. So like gender euphoria or congruence is this idea of feeling deeply like at home in yourself, right? It's when I feel comfortable in how my body looks and feels. I'm being perceived as how I truly feel, and I'm being allowed to express myself in my authentic way, right? So it's all of these things that we talked about sort of aligning to create this like euphoria, deep sense of home and comfort. And so I just wanted to pause and ask if there was ever a time that you felt truly at home in you, and what brought that about, or what that experience was like. And again, you can just chat it, shout it out.
I think for me, working professionally, I'm always just kind of, restricted, reserved, and making sure that I'm presenting what is expected of me. But when I am with my peers, colleagues, or very close friends, and I'm able to be my true flashy, as you can already see with how I dress, flashy, fun, very spontaneous self. I could say the most recent time was when I went to Miami. And I actually participated in the drag brunch. And it was just the energy that I had. I could just, I don't know, I just felt good just with the assurance that I received from the performers, and then just from the company that I was keeping, just me being me. I just felt free. I could dress how I wanted to without, not caring what people thought. My personality was just what I needed to be. There was no space where reservation was needed. So that is a time that I can reflect that I felt the most home within myself.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful, man. But just that, like, I feel like expansiveness, right? Of just like being bigger, larger than life, being seen, being honored, being affirmed. Like that's really powerful stuff. And I question if a lot of times like folks just sort of follow along without questioning, and sort of like you end up living a life in a way that really isn't authentic, because you're like, well, this is what you do, right? You get a job, you have a family, like, and if that's your truth, brilliant, happy as a clam, prosper. But I think for a number of folks, it's like, wait, like how I exist is not me, right? This is a version of me, but not my true core self. So with the youth that y'all work with, even if it is like just for a couple of days, I always think about like, how can I help you feel this connection to you, right? How can I help you feel comfortable in your body, be seen as who you truly are, being able to express yourself as you truly are. And maybe it's just for a moment, but at that moment is a breath of fresh air. It's being able to just drop your shoulders, take a breath, and be like, okay, I can just be. And that, unfortunately, for so many youth, is something that is very far and few between. And so just trying to figure out how can we problem solve to build up these moments of euphoria so that you show up and stay around for that next day and the day after that. So just finishing up the section, lastly, we have sexual and romantic orientation, right? So again, this is who am I sexually attracted to, who am I romantically attracted to? And these are two very different things. I was always taught that sex and intimacy are one and the same, right? Like I watched a lot of Disney as a child, and it was just always lumped together. And I was always taught like, don't have sex until you're married or in love. And it's like, okay, cool. But what if I never experienced that sensation of being in love? Like, what does that mean? Or what if I never have that experience of wanting to kiss someone? Like the idea of that is just like, no, I'm good. That seems strange. Like, I don't want your cooties, like, leave me alone, right? So these two things are separate. And so some folks might identify as asexual, which means that they don't have sexual attraction as our culture expects. That doesn't mean they never have sex or have any sort of physical engagement. It just means that it's more on a spectrum. Same with romantic attraction. The term for that is aromantic. I just don't have romantic attraction as my culture expects. Again, that's a very, very wide spectrum. One example I always like to give is I'm a very like emotional person. I love intimacy. I love like walking on a beach at sunset, holding my partner's hand, trying to be all gooey and mushy. My partner, like, she'll play along, but there's a threshold. And then she's like, that was fun. I need to like go away, right? Like I need to like catch my breath and not swim in this, right? We all have different relationships. Maybe like your partner is super into cuddles and has really high like skin hunger where they want that physical contact. And then maybe you are just like, no, please stop touching me. Like I want to be in the physical space with you, but I need to like stretch out on the couch and like just hang out, right? So we all have different thresholds. And so with sexual romantic attraction, right, it's sort of broken up into feelings, behaviors, and identities. So attraction, action, and then the word to describe. So for some folks, those three line up. For others, not so much. So for example, I can identify that I am a cisgender woman who is attracted to both men and women, right? But I only act on my attraction towards men and identify as straight, right? Other folks, I am attracted to men, I engage, I act on those feelings and identify as straight or gay, right? So it's more of that alignment. Karen, yes, you have a question or hand raised?
I do have my hand raised. And I if you don't mind, it connects back to the congruence piece real fast. I don't know, because you said at the beginning, like mental health's not your field, it's the educational piece. For everyone in the room, I'm not sure if you guys are aware, the ICD-11, which is like the international coding for health and mental health diagnoses, actually changed gender identity to gender incongruence and moved it out of the mental health section and moved it to the sexual health section to destigmatize it, to identify this is not a mental health condition. It's a sexual health condition that deserves medical attention and hopefully shifts towards accessing medical treatment and care in an appropriate way. And I believe the ICD-11 went live on January 1, 2022. So I don't know if it gives hope for the US and our next DSM revision to kind of shift the stigma and really to focus on that congruence piece. Rather than this being some kind of mental illness that needs to be fixed. Like that's not, but that's what it suggests when it sits in our DSM. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that there is movement. So in the field of mental health,
just nuggets of information. Learn something new every day, right? But no, I mean, that's really powerful, right? Because it, like, again, it just implies like I'm broken. I don't know what's wrong with me. Like there's something that has to be fixed. And it's like, no, you're good. You're just you just have a different experience, right? Thank you for sharing that. All right. So I've touched on this a little bit, right? But we all, again, have so many pieces that make up who we are, right? Me, myself, and I, like I have my class, I have where I've grown up, I have my race, my gender, my sexuality, my ability status. Folks have like spiritual, religion, like there's so many pieces that make us us. And often we are reduced to just one identity. I don't know if y'all know Audre Lorde, poet, writer. She's a Black gay woman. And she wrote many things, but one of the books that she wrote that I just found like really incredible is A Sister Outsider. And in one of the essays, she writes, I am a gay Black woman. You cannot separate these things. Like you have to take both into account to meet me, to truly see me. And I think about that all the time, especially when we work with youth. They're coming with this whole dynamic like solar system that they engage with, and you have to look at that whole piece. But so often, like especially just like the older I get and the more like quote unquote professional, I feel like I'm being forced to become more and more narrow. Like specialized, I guess. And like, there's absolute power in that. And when you do that, I think you're missing how all of these things connect, and they do, right? So just trying to understand that intersectional lens that youth are coming with. So these are some of the risk factors that we're going to break down a little bit. So these are sort of the three main wheelhouses that like really impact LGBTQ youth, particularly trans youth. So for stigma, I used to have this as isolation, and I switched it to stigma because isolation is absolutely powerful, but also isolation to me is also like the symptom of something greater happening. And to me, from like the lived experiences, the stories, the research, stigma to me and prejudice just seemed like this greater word of triggering that intense feeling of isolation and wanting to hide and separate. So I just wanted to name that. All right, so starting out with stigma, right? So stigma is right, like this labeling or stereotyping due to the groups that you belong to. And again, we are all taught these stories of how to live, how to exist, and how certain communities exist, right? And those stories, when they're told again and again and again, create this truth that even if it's false, is still truth, and can also create bias, whether we're aware of it or not. So with stigma, that can also be external or internal. So external stigma is I'm experiencing prejudice, discrimination from my greater community, from those around me, or even having internal stigma of I'm bad because I'm gay. I'm broken because I'm trans. Like, this is wrong. Even if I know, like, rationally that's not true, if you're told again and again that being part of the LGBTQ plus community is bad, that is going to impact you, right? Like, it's going to, like, you don't just disappear. So like, for example, I remember vividly, I was 16, I was in my first girlfriend's kitchen, like we were just hanging out, and I was like just having this panic attack because I was like, okay, I think I'm gay or bi, like I'm pretty sure that's there. I couldn't say it really like out loud to like my family and like the greater community. It was just like a very few select group of friends and like obviously the person I was dating. But I was like, okay, I think that's what that is. And I remember so viscerally having this quick thought of, I can't be trans. Like, I cannot do this. Like, this is not even something we are opening the door to in the realm of possibility. And it wasn't until literally 10 years later that I met my now wife that I was finally able to start opening that door of exploration to being like, what is this? Like, what are these feelings, this disconnect, this like isolation that I've always felt? But that internalized stigma dictated the first 26, 27 years of my life because I could not self-accept. Like, my brain was like, we're not even going there, right? And that resulted in a lot of various mental health issues like anxiety and depression and isolation and feeling disconnected and ending up in some harmful relationships because I was trying to be something that I just wasn't, right? So again, with stigma, we're also seeing, I mentioned a few times now, like the legislation that is happening, all of these multiple levels of stigma at various levels of our community. And again, all of this is going to result in things like isolation, higher rates of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, substance seeking, all of these different things. Is this making sense? Are there any like thoughts, feelings? Just want to pause. No? Okay. All right. So then family rejection. Families are great, aren't they? Not complex ecosystems at all. So with family rejection, this can be a very large spectrum. A youth can come out and the family can meet them with absolute like love, cool, let's go to Pride, what do you need, like let's rock it out, to get out of my house, you're not welcome here, right? And then everything in between. I've also seen a number of families start out like being like, get out of my house, you are no longer welcome, to being brilliant advocates for their kiddos, right? So it can absolutely change and flow. It just completely depends. There's a group that I work really close with called He, She, Z, and We, and it's spelled Z-E. And they are a parent family support group for families and guardians that have trans youth in their life. They're totally free, but what they do is they provide a really crucial space for guardians, caregivers to process all of their complex emotions once they find out that they have a trans youth in their life, and to also get ongoing education and support from folks who are experiencing similar things. So they meet virtually. I highly, highly recommend them. The woman who runs it, Shannon McKay, she's like my second mom, love her to death. Just a very brilliant, kind woman who meets folks where they at, while also helping them learn and grow on their journey. But with family acceptance, right, it's shown that around 1 in 3 LGBTQ youth were accepted and felt really affirmed at home. The rates for trans youth are even less. Like, it's just not good, those numbers. Unfortunately, when trans youth come out, the vast majority of time is they're going to be met with some level of rejection. And again, that can also change greatly. So for example, I know some families around the holidays will be like, cool, I accept you, you can dress how you want to dress, we'll call you by your name, but we have your grandparents coming over for Thanksgiving, so I need you to dress in these clothes, we're going to call you by your birth name. And my intent is I'm trying to protect you. But the reality, and what often youth are hearing, is you're asking me to hide who I am, right? Like, I can only be me in certain moments. So instead, what we want is to just try to offer and increase that like unconditional acceptance. And instead, it's like, hey, grandparents, if you can't play nice, you're not welcome in our home. And like, are those uncomfortable conversations? Absolutely. Will they probably get your heart rate going? No doubt. But again, this is like, family acceptance is the #1 protective factor. Even if school is a dumpster fire, even if my family community is just, or like my greater community is just not good and super hostile, if I can at least go home and catch my breath, that can protect me against all of these various mental health crises, right? Like, I know one young trans girl who lives in more rural Virginia, and I mean, her family, they are diehard advocates. Like, they have gone to state legislators and testified, they are at rallies, like they have gone above and beyond to affirm their daughter. And their daughter has legitimately gotten death threats from her community, right? And this kid is just like, she has high anxiety, she has a lot of other like things going on, but she's okay and she's stable because her parents have her so much, right? And she's met with complete love and acceptance and celebration, and her parents have helped create this really beautiful community for her to just be affirmed and seen as who she truly is, and she's a legend, right? So it is this amazing buffer to help balance everything out. So I want to pause here because parents and guardians are tricky little nuggets. So are there any questions on how to navigate parents and guardians when they're like, no go, we're not doing this? And you can also just sit with those and like think about it. And if something pops up later, that's cool too. I'm not trying to put folks on the spot. But my point is that I think often through education and parents being provided a space, they're able to move along. Not always. I've definitely met some where it's like, okay, you are going to lose your kid. In one way or another, your relationship with your child will probably have a limit because you cannot see them as who they truly are. I think also with the youth that I worked with, particularly the trans youth I've worked with, if family is just not moving, like they're just absolutely staying in that hater tolerant space, it's just kind of, it's problem solving, right? It's resource seeking. It's what are other ways that we can build up your euphoria, your sense of community, like on free online groups through the Trevor Project, having those crisis numbers in your back pocket, identifying friends and adults that you can turn to at school or in your greater community, right? Like, it feels like a joke compared to what youth are experiencing, but it's like, this is what I can do, and this is what we can offer given your age, given your community, given all of these barriers that we're also facing. Does that make sense? Karen, yeah.
And I think they're just really good. Like, I'm thinking of actual like interventions that you guys could do on the crisis state units, like sitting down with a youth and mapping out their like current eco map and who are allies, where are the allies, where can we create allies, right? If it's not going to be family, or, you know, when you have those parents who are like, not my kid, and like, just being able to say, that's a lot of information. If you want this resource, there's the support group, the he, she, ze, and we, the support group, like just being able to not feel like the pressure of like, I need to fix this before this kid goes home, because that's like totally out of our control sometimes on these in these short stays. But I'm already like thinking through like how this translates to like actual moments and interventions on the units. And I don't know if anybody else from one of the units wants to talk about that at all or not, but that's kind of what I got sparked with DeHaven.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Other like, and again, it feels so small, but I've just, from my experience, have made a big difference. With trans youth, like even having them write their name on their hand, right? So that way, like, okay, I'm being misgendered left and right, but I look down and it's like, I see my name, like I know who I am. I know young trans girls who have done things like they'll wear hair ties on their wrists to just like, it looks like a rubber band or whatever, right? But it's like, I know that this is like a connection to femininity, right? Or I know gay youth who have connected in online spaces, Discord, whatever, like, I don't even understand what Discord is. I tried to do training on Discord and I was so lost. I was like, this is ridiculous, right? Like, what is happening? But just, they're so resourceful and clever at finding communities. It's just like, let's help identify. So that way, when you are in crisis and your brain is literally not working, we have all of this laid out and we can just execute, and we don't have to like think about it. We can just act, right? So lastly, with risk factors, right? Hostile schools, good times. I'm convinced that middle school, like that is just where like things go horribly wrong. Everyone focuses on elementary and high school. And I'm like, y'all, middle school is where things go down. It's just wild. It's absolutely wild. So with schools, right? Those who are bullied 5 to 6 more times likely to attempt suicide compared to those who not. The vast majority of LGBTQ youth who are surveyed through things like GLSEN and the Trevor Project show that schools are not happy places, right? Whether that's through their peers or teachers or school policies, there's just this ongoing hostility and intentional prejudice that is happening, right? So are any of these like numbers shocking to people? Like, not really. No, we're just chilling. No one's shocked by anything.
Hey.
Thank you, Janet. Yeah, be shocked, be amazed.
Now, I would say that the very last one is incredibly shocking for me. That this is, you know, the number is basically 100%. Right. It's basically 100%. And if we go without providing any type of services or any type of supports for this community, you know, that is the entire community going without, and it could potentially have devastating consequences later on, you know, in life, especially with this building and starting in middle school. So like the impact, you know, for like adulthood, or even if they're able to make it, you know, regarding that like second statistic, not the second one, the first one
Mhm.
that they've like thought about, they've had that suicidal ideation. That's very, very shocking.
Right.
That 92%. So, and like Karen stated in the chat, how much time youth spend
So
at
much
school,
time,
that they're
like
there all day.
all day. And then like, you know, like I feel like so many youth are also like, oh, I do this after school,
Right.
right? Like, I mean, when I was 14, I was
Mhm.
at school until like 7 in the morning until like 7 at night.
Absolutely.
Right. And
And
then I would go home or go
Mhm.
to whatever. Like, but that was my whole life was school. So if school is
Yeah.
bad, and it often was, like I had, like I remember in elementary school, I just dressed in a very, like I had a horrible bowl haircut and I wore like this really baggy t-shirt and shorts. Like that was my
Mhm.
uniform. I just did it all the time. And in my head, I was completely gender neutral. I was just existing. And I
Right.
had teachers
Right.
straight up call me it, right? And
Oh,
like I had
wow.
teachers like pointing me out, being like, I don't know what to do with that. Like, what is it? Like things like that. And so that didn't feel good. So I learned how to change my gender expression to not experience this call
Right.
out, right? To not experience this
Right.
stigma. And then luckily, as I got older, I was able to change school communities that were more accepting and just like truly did not care. And so that helped me show up to school and get better grades and
Mhm.
seek college and all of these things. But like, and especially with like schools, if I intersect Black and gay,
Yeah.
brown and trans, right? If I put the prejudice of sexual and or gender with race, with class, there's no way I'm going to continue to go to school and like seek secondary education, right? And it just sets you up
Yeah.
for this whole lifelong journey because you are just in survival mode in 7th grade or elementary school, right? Like, because this is happening even younger. I know like 6-year-olds who are like battling, and then folks are
Absolutely.
like, oh, you just don't know who you are because you're 6 years old. It's like, I know who I am. Research shows that gender is set around like 3 to 4 years old. I may not be able to have a PowerPoint, but like, I know what I like. If my PE teacher says boys over here, girls over here, and I want to go with the boys, I
Mhm.
know who I am, right? I'm trying to communicate it, but it's whether or not the adults around me are willing to listen and get over themselves to show up and let me be me, right? So it's just wild, y'all. It is wild. But
Also want to say
like,
to that, Del Haven, even like given your situation, like what you've encountered, your own lived experience in middle school and elementary school, like that landscape has just changed so much today. And it's being like compounded by social media. So
absolutely,
like, yeah, sure, like you were able to leave, like you and I, we're able to leave at like 6, 7 o'clock, but so much of that, like those attacks or the bullying follows kids, home with them through
absolutely.
their devices and through social media platforms. So absolutely.
It is.
Mhm.
I mean, like social media. Like I just really question if anyone should have it. Like it is just like, especially right now. I mean, and like obviously like the algorithms change and whatnot, but like TikTok in particular, I'm like, I can't. Like it is so heavy and like just, I mean, videos of murders happen and like assault and like youth, like 12-year-olds are just watching this because it's just there. And it's like, yeah, it is. The impact of mental health is absolutely, absolutely unreal. Um, I digress. Love a good tangent. ADHD is wonderful, y'all. But again, so with hostile schools, right? High anxiety, high depression, just general mental health crisis, not attending school, lower grades. And again, once I start intersecting different identities, all of these rates just go even higher, right? So again, Black and brown, LGBTQ plus youth, like all of these rates are just even worse. And often those are the youth that aren't given the space and the right to say, I am blank and I need help, right? So just some general stats on mental health. I feel like we've talked about this a lot. Again, BIPOC, LGBTQ plus youth, higher attempts at suicide, COVID, my brain is still processing COVID. And again, like, this isn't shocking. 80% of LGBTQ said COVID made home more stressful. Also, COVID was this interesting moment where if school is horrible and I have to be home, that can be great and weirdly safe. But if home is horrible and school is my safe place, I'm in an actual living hell, right? So I think COVID was just this interesting moment of, I think for some youth that I met, it was a weird protective factor. And then for others, it actually made everything way, way worse, right? Are any of these like stats surprising? Karen's just chilling. Karen's like, bro, I know. So barriers to mental health. Would y'all say from your work, youth are like knocking on the door being like, hey friends, I'm not okay? Trick question.
I think we're in a space and period of time where some youth are saying it, and their parental reaction is like, no, just man up, you're good, just keep going, until they're in like complete crisis. And so I think some of the challenge sometimes is like, I'm a youth, I can't get to my own services quite yet, but I might feel like I need them, but how do I access them? And so,
yeah, absolutely. So with that, right, like with the like eco mapping, who are places, who are adults that you can turn to, whether that's in your school or your community, even trying to identify, like, is there a Boys and Girls Club in your community that you can access, right? Is there some sort of outside organization that you can go to catch your breath and get out of school and out of home, right? Is there a counselor in your school, psychologist, teacher, anyone where you can just find ongoing support? Trevor Project, again, love Trevor Project. They have really expanded their services to, they used to just be that suicide hotline, but now they have online support groups. They have like the 24/7 texting, calling, web chat, like they have a lot of different ways that you can access affirming folks. So highly recommend them. And then with Trevor Project, they also always have like that escape button. So if something happens and a youth is like Mayday, they can just pop out of whatever and they're good to go. But in a lot of the resources I sent was really trying to center those ongoing areas of community that youth can hopefully access when y'all have to like send them out into the world. But by and large, when it comes to like those barriers of mental health, like I feel like a fair amount of it was affordability, but even more so, I'm scared to ask for parent permission, right? Or like I ask and I'm not taken seriously because of ageism, or I'm scared that the mental health provider won't get my identity or identities. And then I think there's also the piece of stigma of mental health is not something that is talked about in my community. Like sexuality is not something that is talked about in my community, gender, like all of these things. And then when we pair it with mental health, it just becomes this really intense barrier of, I don't even know how to begin to talk about it because my community and my culture does not, like, we don't do this, right? I need to be tough, I need to figure it out. And instead, like, my mental health just continues to get worse. Protective factors, right? Because otherwise, like, things would be really bleak and this would be a horrible training and y'all would never talk to me again, right? So I always think of things in like a balance. If one area is horrible, how can we buffer up the others to hopefully find relief, right? So the number one protective factor is that family support, right? But if I can at least maybe get support from my greater community, my suicidal attempts decrease. If I'm able to find support for friends, my suicidal attempts go down, right? Like I'm able to find breath and support elsewhere. So that's how I always think of things. So when working with youth, especially in crisis, if they're like, this is horrific and it's not going to change, cool, where can we find that balance elsewhere, right? So this is my like favorite stat ever, right? So just by using a youth's chosen name consistently ongoing, I am actively engaging in suicide prevention. By me saying, hey, Mary Sue, I am helping that youth decrease depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts. Isn't that incredible, right? Because it's more than a name. It's not just like a trend that is like popping up on social media. It's like, this is how I see myself. Like when I chose the name DeHaven, there is a lot of intent and history behind that name. So if you do not honor that name, you're not seeing me, right? You're getting like, if I'm with family and they're using my birth name, you're going to get a very weird version of me very, very quickly. And I'm just going to try to get out of here as fast as possible, right? Versus if folks are like, hey, DeHaven, what's up? They're super weird. Cool, like happy as a clam. Like we can just hang out and vibe and be in community, and you're going to get who I truly am, right? Because yeah, it's just not, it's not a name. Are these stats like surprising to anyone? Like it's so simple, right? It's just so incredibly simple. And unfortunately, like from my conversations with like the folks at he, she, ze, and we, like sometimes these are the conversations that need to get parents' attention, right? It's like if you do not change your behavior, the research shows that there's a very high chance you will lose your child to suicide or substance abuse or running away or anything like this, right? But you will, like you are risking your kiddo. And unfortunately, like those very like brutal conversations, from what I've been told, have been helpful to like help them understand like, oh, this is like not a phase, this is like a thing, and I need to like do my own work. Okay, so in our remaining time is, it just disappears, y'all. What are ways that y'all can think of interrupting these risk factors of stigma, family rejection, and hostile schools, right? Like how do we reduce, how do we change? What are some nuggets of thoughts? We've already talked about it a little bit.
I think you mentioned for stigma, you just said it, you know, being supportive. And, you know, I think a lot of with our youth that comes to our unit, we do ask upon assessment, you know, what are your preferred pronouns? And we do have the family reaction where it's kind of like, no, that's not, you know, and we still honor it nonetheless. Once the parent is not present, and it's not that we're being sneaky or doing things behind their back, but we see the intention of the youth that this is what they identify as. And so we honor that on the unit, and we can see how it helps them flourish in their individuality. So I think that helps with the stigma, the family rejection, honestly, education, resource, and consistency. You know, if you know, a agency or a program that is showing how we can advocate and educate them, then sometimes we do have a better response where, kind of like you said earlier, hey, you don't identify that, but you're still advocating that's awesome. So they're more likely to want to jump on and learn how they could be better representatives of their child. And then in the school, I think it kind of ties in with what we would do with the family rejection, is the education, putting programs in, having advocacy programs within the school to have that resource or just that outlet or that just support that they can have within the schools. And even with you saying like the kids in gym and preferring to be with the boys versus the girls, you know, eventually migrating to that space where this is acceptable, this is okay, no different than what they're doing in the world. So when are we going to eventually break it into the system of where they're at majority of the day?
Yeah.
So these are just some ideas.
Well said. Done. We can just keep on swimming. Yeah, Karen.
No, I've got like big system thoughts in my head about like just where are we with policies and procedures that reduce hostile schools? Like I worked at an agency where we were having meetings about trauma-informed culture, and it came to my attention that like my Black coworkers didn't feel like they could address racism with their clients because they were uncertain if leadership would support them if a complaint was made.
Yeah.
Like that was that was the reality of our rural community. And I think now about LGBTQ, do teachers feel like they can address bullying? Because if one of those parents complain, will they get support about them intervening? Or will they be thrown under the bus and possibly, what happens? And so I really think both possibly a thought to take back to your units about, are there policies and procedures that make sure your staff are supported about confronting and addressing this in a healthy, appropriate way, but also like, how do we make sure schools become those places too, where like adults feel that they can intervene without fear of not having support. But I don't know, that was just a really big.
No, absolutely. And I mean, right now, like policies have a massive impact, right? And I think like there's been a disconnect between lived experience and policies by like the vast majority of folks. And like in the past, like several years, like the policies that have come through state legislator, school board policies, like they have a massive, massive impact on the day-to-day lived experiences of LGBTQ plus youth and adults, right? Like I forget which state, but there was, I think it's somewhere in the Midwest where a ban on gender affirming healthcare was passed for youth, but they're also trying to implement that for adults, right? Like, and that feels like, how is that possible? How is that legal, right? But policy, like interpretation of the law is very, very broad, right? So
or in
it's
Texas where they're going to call it child abuse if you.
Yep. Florida, same thing, right? They're actually trying to take youth away from their families if they've experienced any gender affirming care, or if the parents or guardians have, right? So it's like, now I'm threatening to displace families, which the United States has a vast history of doing. We're just seeing it more explicitly laid out in this particular way. But yeah, so like this actually moves things beautifully into moving past allyship, right? It's moving into this space of action and consistent ongoing engagement to be an advocate, to be an accomplice, a co-conspirator. And I love this language. It is directly from like anti-racist work, and but it's framing things in this way of, how do I use my privilege? How do I use the power that I have to step in and speak up and protect those who are the most vulnerable, right? Like to me, again, if I am out and about, right? How can I use my able-bodied, my whiteness, my middle upper class socializing? All of these things are protective factors for me to step in to with my friends and colleagues who are Black and brown, who have different identities within the LGBTQ community, right? Because even though I identify as trans, my able-bodied, masculine presenting whiteness, all of those are protective factors, versus if I was a Black trans woman who presented very in a feminine way, right? There's the stats show that different identities, different experiences have higher rates of harm, right? So just thinking about, how can you engage in your local community, in your organization, with your family and friends to activate and become more engaged, right? Because I think we are definitely in a time when allyship and putting like that safe space sticker or that rainbow flag up, like we have to act and intervene to interrupt the hate, because that hate is violence and putting youth at risk, right? Like that is just the reality of where we're at and have been for some time. So like y'all will get these slides. These are just some areas of support and the impact of that area of support, right? So everything from social support to positive role models to affirming environments, building individual coping skills, all of those have various levels of protective factors, right? And I think there's a number of different ways that y'all can engage with each of these things in your work, even if it's just for a day, couple days, 3 days, right? Like there's a lot that I think youth can get out of that time, even though it feels so short and limited. Even if it's just like one day where a youth is finally able to relax and breathe, that alone, I think, is a protective factor to help them remember. It's like, oh, I talked to Miss Susan who affirmed me and let me be me. There's someone out there who cares about me, and I can hold on to that little kernel of love and support, right?
Excuse me,
Yeah.
just in the interest of respecting everyone's time,
Yep.
if you need to leave at this moment, please do so. This is being recorded and we will most certainly share it out with all of the staff.
Yep.
Thank you for your
And this is
participation.
the last slide. Thank you for saying that. Again, right, like just centering that humanity, being that person that's speaking up. If your coworker says something harmful, you're intervening. Same with youth, right? The adults, like we set the tone. So we set what's safe, what's not safe. If a youth is picking on another youth on the floor, interrupt it, lean in, stop that bullying, offering that education, those resources to parents, guardians, so hopefully they can continue their journey. And again, plugging youth into that ecosystem of support, because it absolutely exists. It's just how can we identify it and access it. I'm going to stop now. We were ranting for a really long time. I really appreciate y'all's time. Go play. It's kind of cold, but go be a human. Really appreciate y'all.
Thank you so much, DeHaven, and I encourage everybody to take a look at that last slide and really think about like what are the action steps we can take from this training and possibly look at implementing on the units. And I know there are things you guys are already doing, right? Like I saw really awesome things when I was walking around last year with you know, pronouns on the doors and all kinds of just affirming interventions. And so I think today is more about just like, how do we continue to enhance that and grow that and make sure we're thinking intentionally about after they leave the unit, all those kinds of things. So thank you so much, DeHaven. If anyone has a question or a comment and is able to stay on and ask, I'm sure we can get through that quickly. But really appreciate you guys taking your time today and being here with us.
Absolutely. Like, thank you all so much for your time. I know it's a long time to sit and look at a screen, so really appreciate y'all.
I do have a question. What are some tips or like guidance you could provide to like our crisis stab units in regards to like crafting inclusive like policies and procedures, you know, like throughout the floor, you know, that kind of like expands, you know, modeling, affirming behavior, but like what is something that may need to be, you know, coded or written and like maybe standard practices, you know, that take place?
Yeah, I mean, I think like just naming, in the past, it's been like just sexual identity. It's like, we will not discriminate, and it's like very broad, right? But just being really specific on sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, like laying all of those out and just being really transparent with staff of these are the consequences if you do discriminate, right? Like, we're not going to tolerate your like, oh, I'm uncomfortable with that, or it's against my belief system, right? It's like, okay, cool, like heard. And in this work environment, like our job is to catch these youth who are not okay. This is our ethics. These are the best practices. This is what we're centering. If you can do that, great. If not, peace and love, right? Like, I'm not trying to force you to do anything, but this is just the reality of the job. And I think, like, again, those conversations are incredibly uncomfortable. They're really scary. But when it's literally like life and death is on the line, I think that window of grace and patience is a lot shorter. And if someone makes a mistake, that's one thing, right? Like, I have misgendered youth. You apologize, you correct, you keep on, right? If I misgender a youth, I'm told, and then I keep doing it, even after I've been told 1, 2, 3 times, now we've entered the realm of intentionality. And we need to have a conversation about that. And I think just being transparent, being clear, and holding folks accountable, that alone, I think is just a game changer in how policy and daily life interact.
And
Is that helpful?
And I
Yeah.
can share from my example previously about how we had to end up addressing like racism. We actually found our policy on like harassment and discrimination really only spoke to like in between coworkers and from like supervisors to coworkers. So we actually had to go back and update our entire agency's policies and procedures to include what do you do when a client is harassing another client, harassing a staff member? What authority do I have to address that? How will and what does that actually mean, right? Like having someone from HR or QA, quality assurance people, really talk to staff about like, what does this look like? How do you intervene in a way that is helpful without being accused of pushing your agenda on people or like whatever complaint might be made in the future about you. So it's engaging all those people within the CSB. If you're at a CSB, St. Josephsville, I don't know if anyone's here from there, but like all of that has to happen. And then it goes up to like the board, and then it goes up to the board that oversees the board. All of it has to be like approved. And it takes a while, but like it was eye-opening to see that like that didn't exist in our current policy and procedure, that there was no way to address like what you would consider like harassment or discrimination between that level. So anyways, just a thought as someone who's been in the CSB system.
Right. And like, I love your point about clients to staff, right? Like if a client is being cruel to a staff member based off of their gender presentation, there's like, that has to be addressed, right? Okay, cool, you're in crisis, and that doesn't excuse you being horrible to the person trying to help you, right?
Yep.
Like, and so I think that is often completely overlooked. And so, yeah, like just labeling it every single direction, like we're just we're not doing this because already we're not okay, and everyone's overworked. We're not adding by also making staff like scared.
Right. And yeah, no, our staff had a big question. Like if I'm witnessing client to client interactions that are really awful, like what is my role? Am I required to step in? Could I be in trouble if I don't? If I step in and they get mad at me and make a complaint, and am I in trouble for that? Like there was just a lot of confusion about like what is my role, and really it's not a like safety issue in terms of physical safety, which a lot of us have physical safety guidelines. But if I know this is incredibly emotionally unsafe, like what is my role? Anyway, it's just big picture.
Thank you for saying all of that. Write it all down. I'm all about it. Like write it all down. Like I've always been like, what is the point of documenting? My God, document everything. Like lay it, have it in writing, reference back.
But that's some of the HR QA person being able to share that with staff. Meredith, Ashley, do you guys have anything other questions, comments?
No, thank you. I just appreciate your time today. This has been beneficial. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you, Meredith. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you all for joining us and being a part of this training. We truly appreciate everyone's time, and we hope that everyone's able to take something from this today.
And if anything comes up, please don't hesitate to reach out. Always here.
Take care.
Bye, all. Thank you.